Kathleen Janiro. In 1994, 20-year-old Kathleen Janiro lived in Barrie, Ontario, Canada, with her 2-year-old daughter, Dawn. On October 10th, Dawn was staying with her grandparents, Dinora and Fernando Janiro, in Toronto, leaving Kathleen home alone. During the day, a friend knocked on her door but received no response. Concerned, they entered the house and made a shocking discovery in the basement: Kathleen's lifeless body. She had been stabbed multiple times. The Barrie police began the investigation but handed the case over to the Ontario Provincial Police in 1999. Despite an extensive investigation, no arrests were made. In 2012, the case was returned to the Barrie police. Investigators noted that they had collected hundreds of pieces of evidence and taken numerous witness statements throughout the years. It is important that every piece of information received is always closely examined. You never know which one holds the key detail you are searching for and will lead your team ultimately to the arrest of the person responsible, said case manager Detective Kevin Scales. In 2014, investigators revealed that they were monitoring 2 men who they believed were connected to Kathleen's case. Kathleen's daughter Dawn also spoke at the press conference. She told the media how she first learned that her mother's life was taken. When I was 6 years old and my grandparents were distracted, I was flipping through channels and came across the Crime Stoppers episode. The episode was a reenactment of a young woman being stabbed in her apartment. As young as I was, I still remember being terrified and sad for this woman and sad for her family. Moments later, a picture of the real victim holding her child was put on the screen and I realized at that moment, that was my mother. I knew because it was the same picture that's in my living room to this day. I've never been able to get rid of the hurt and confusion that flooded my mind that night. 7 years later, in January of 2021, detectives arrested 58-year-old Robert Bruce McQueen in connection to the case. Peter Lyon, Barrie police spokesperson, said he was arrested yesterday morning without incident operating a motor vehicle in the south end of the city of Barrie. I think he was surprised. As you can appreciate, 26 years have passed. That's a lot of looking over your shoulder, wondering if today is the day. Well, yesterday was the day, Leon said of the arrest. Dawn said that the arrest had brought her closure. I wish my grandparents, Dinora and Fernando De Niro, were alive to see this day. It has been revealed that Kathleen and Robert knew each other, but the police did not elaborate further. They also didn't give a lot of information as to what led to the arrest of Robert, just that the arrest came following a tip they received in 2019. On January 21st, Robert made a brief appearance in a Barrie courtroom. He also faces charges of driving while disqualified in August 2020. Not much is known about Robert, except that he spent most of his life in Barrie, worked in construction and various odd jobs, and had a strong passion for shows like CSI and Law and Order. Investigators are also exploring the possibility that Robert may have been involved in other crimes. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. Moving on to the next case. Diane Augut. Technology has revolutionized our world in ways our ancestors could never have imagined. It opens up possibilities for activities such as shopping online, enjoying kitten videos, or staying connected with friends. Yet, in certain situations, it can also be unsettling. Imagine the horror of hearing a loved one's cries during a struggle on the other end of the phone. The anguish of losing a child, accompanied by the haunting sound of their final screams in a voicemail, is a heartbreaking thought. Diane Louise Augut, born on February 21, 1958, lived much of her life in Florida, leading what seemed to be a typical existence. A stay-at-home mother in the 1970s and early 1980s, caring for her 3 children, Diane's life took a tragic turn when she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. This condition led her life to unravel, and after losing custody of her children in 1988 and divorcing their father in 1991, she fell deeper into drug and alcohol addiction, often failing to take her prescribed medication. Over the years, she faced multiple minor arrests. Her mother reported that Diane had been taken into police custody at least 32 times under Florida's Baker Act, which permits a judge, police officer, or doctor to decide if an individual needs an involuntary medical examination. Diane was also known to make poor choices in friendships, often trusting strangers, and could frequently be seen talking to herself. This mix of mental illness and an overly trusting nature may have contributed to her disappearance in 1998. At the time, Diane was staying temporarily with her sister, Deborah, in Hudson. On April 10th, she was seen leaving their shared residence in Hudson. The following day, a witness reported seeing Diane walking north along US 19 near New York Avenue in Hudson. She was never seen again. 3 days later, on April 13th, Diane's mother, Mildred Young, returned home to a disturbing voicemail from her daughter. In the message, Diane was heard saying, "Help, help, let me out," followed by sounds that suggested a struggle, with someone trying to take the phone from her. Diane then shouted, "Hey, give me that," before the call abruptly ended. When Mildred checked the caller ID, she was led to a business named Starlight in the Odessa area. However, when she returned the call, it went unanswered. Further investigation by the police revealed that 6 businesses named Starlight existed within a 45-mile radius, but none were located specifically in Odessa. Some armchair detectives speculated that Starlight could have been the name of an LLC rather than a local business. At this point in Diane's tragic story, many have questioned why Mildred didn't contact the police right away. This is a valid question, but there is no clear answer. Online sleuths have suggested that Mildred might have been used to her daughter's occasional misadventures, likely due to Diane's tendency to skip her medication. This type of behavior may have seemed somewhat normal. Just 2 weeks before Diane's disappearance, she had been in a mental facility for several weeks, and Mildred, along with other family members, believed that Diane should never have been released, as she required institutionalized care. Several days later, on April 15th, Diane's severed fingertip was discovered along the roadside of US 19, near New York Avenue, the same area where she had been spotted on April 11th. The fingernails sported the same coral color that Diane was last seen wearing, and the fingertip was specifically her right middle finger just above the first knuckle. It was located first by a woman, but she assumed it was just a prank and left it. However, after telling her boyfriend that night, he worried that perhaps it was real, and they went to look for it the next day. According to reports, both halves of the couple described the fingertip differently, leading police to wonder if there were multiple fingertips along the roadside, but they only ever located one. The fingerprint from the severed finger matched Diane's criminal record. Also, at some point between 10th April 18th, Diane's house was robbed. It is unknown if this was done in connection with her disappearance, or if it was by local teenagers who knew the house was empty. 2 weeks later, and a bag of Diane's neatly folded clothing was found located inside the outdoor freezer of a convenience store where her sister Deborah worked in Odessa. There were some conflicting reports about whether Deborah found the bag herself, but most reports state that her boss found it and then contacted her. As Diane was a regular customer, the store manager was familiar with the clothing and the bizarre circumstances surrounding the 40-year-old's disappearance. Deborah recognized the clothing as belonging to her sister, as she'd recently given the items to her. The freezer had last been checked 3 weeks before the clothing was found inside. In 2000 days later, a clear plastic Ziploc bag was found by Diane's brother's girlfriend, a woman named Terry, who'd gone to her local Circle K convenience store for a drink and some cigarettes. It is unknown how long the plastic bag had been sitting there, but in black marker, the word Diane had been scrawled across the front, and it contained a pink lipstick, black eyeliner, taboo perfume, and a tube of generic toothpaste, the latter being identified as the one Diane was issued with by the mental facility when she was released. While Mildred Young confirmed that the belongings in the bag looked like those that her daughter might have, it couldn't be conclusively proved by law enforcement to have belonged to Diane. There is much debate surrounding the plastic Ziploc bag, with many online sleuths noting the coincidental timing of its discovery, since it was found just 1 day after a local newspaper reported on the story, again gaining some traction. Many believe the family planted the bag there to try and get the case more attention, but there is no evidence of this. Others have proposed that the bag was Diane's and that she'd had it from leaving the mental hospital. The bag and the fact that her name was written on it in marker resembles the kind of thing carried out of hospitals. After 2000, however, Diane's case largely goes cold. Sometime between 11th April 14th and 1998, witnesses placed the 40-year-old at the Coral Sands Motel, which was managed at the time by a man named Gary Evers and his girlfriend. 3 years later in 2001, Gary was charged with murder after allegedly shooting and killing a man he thought had robbed him. The real robbers were later caught and charged. Although Gary had no prior record in Florida, law enforcement suspects that he might possibly have been involved in Diane's disappearance, but there is no evidence to bring charges against him. In the weeks following Diane's disappearance, there were several witness sightings reported on the DOE network. On April 10th, a bartender at the Hayloft Tavern, located at the intersection of Little Road and State Road 52, believes he served Diane that day. However, he cut her off when her behavior became erratic, as she began walking in circles. Since Diane didn't own a car, it's believed she either went with someone or possibly hitchhiked there. On the 13th, the same day, Diane left her unsettling voicemail for her mother. A waitress at the inn on the Gulf and Hudson reported seeing the 40-year-old dining there. There are few theories regarding what happened to Diane. Law enforcement suspects foul play, but some have speculated that Diane may have lost her fingertip not from an intentional injury but possibly from an accident, such as a slammed car door. Other online theories suggest that Diane might have chosen to leave her life behind and staged her own disappearance or suicide. However, if that were the case, removing one's own finger seems like an extreme measure. If she is still alive, Diane would now be 62 years old and missing her right middle finger. Her disappearance remains an unsolved mystery. Moving on to the next case. Diane Cusick. Diane Cusick, a 23-year-old woman, resided with her parents in Nassau County, New York. After separating from her husband, she had moved back into their home, bringing her 3-year-old daughter from her previous marriage with her. Diane worked as a dance instructor. On February 15, 1968, after completing her shift at a children's dance school, she called her parents to let them know she was heading to the mall to buy shoes. However, she never made it home. When Diane hadn't returned by that evening, her parents went looking for her. They discovered her car, a 1961 Valiant, parked in the Green Acres Mall parking lot in Valley Stream, New York. Upon opening the car door, they were met with a horrific sight. Diane's lifeless body was lying in the back seat. Her face was bruised, and a 2-inch piece of tape was wrapped around her mouth and neck. They immediately contacted the police. An autopsy revealed that she had suffered facial and head injuries. The cause of death was determined to be strangulation. She had defensive wounds on her hands, and police were able to recover DNA evidence from the scene. However, DNA testing did not exist in 1968. Police conducted a massive search of the area and showed Diane's photo to nearly 2,000 people, asking if they could provide any information about her last hours. Police were able to release a description of a suspect seen at a movie theater in the mall shortly before Diane's body was found. Witnesses said that the man was a white male in his late teens or early 20s with average build. They claim he wore eyeglasses and was at least 5 foot 8 inches tall. Diane's estranged husband was ruled out as a suspect as he had an alibi. He was working his part-time job as a taxi driver at the time of the murder. Police questioned multiple people, but no leads could be found and the case would eventually grow cold. In 2016, the DNA sample found at the crime scene was submitted to a national database, but no match could be found. Then in 2021, police in Nassau County received a tip that a killer who was responsible for other killings in a suburban county who was currently locked up in New Jersey may also be responsible for Diane's murder. Police ran a DNA test again, and this time it matched the convicted serial killer Richard Cottingham. Cottingham is now 76 years old and serving a life sentence for murdering nearly half a dozen women and girls in New Jersey and New York since he was arrested in 1980 after a motel employee heard the screams of a woman inside his room. Police were called and they found the woman alive but handcuffed and suffering from bite marks and knife wounds. Cottingham would later admit to killing more than 100 women. However, police have officially linked him to about a dozen killings. He was also nicknamed the Torso Killer because he was known for dismembering his victims. Police believe that Cottingham pretended to be a security guard or possibly a police officer, and that he accused Diane of stealing. He then asked her to come with him and overpowered her in a secluded area. Cottingham was working as a computer programmer for a health insurance company in New York at the time of the killings, and was officially charged with Diane's murder. On December 5, 2022, the man responsible for Diane Cusick's murder, along with 4 other women, confessed to the crimes committed decades earlier. He was sentenced to 25 years to life for Diane's death, but he will not face charges for the other 4 murders, as he is already serving a life sentence for previous convictions. Diane's daughter, Darlene Altman, now 58, spoke at a police conference saying, "I never thought I'd see this day. I've given up. But all these people got justice for me and my mother." The case was finally closed after 54 years. Moving on to the next case. Elizabeth Barraza. Elizabeth Barraza, beloved for her compassion and creativity, lived her life with a strong commitment to making the world a better place. Her passion for charity work and her unwavering dedication to spreading joy were evident in everything she did. Liz had an unmatched ability to connect with others, lifting their spirits with her generosity and selflessness. Tragically, her life was cut short by a senseless, unsolved murder in the early hours of January 25, 2019, leaving those who knew her, from northwest Harris County to across the state of Texas, searching for answers. Despite the wealth of evidence surrounding the case, no clear answers have emerged, leaving everyone involved in a state of confusion and uncertainty. This is an attempt to make sense of the tragedy and offer a more thorough analysis of the circumstances leading to Liz's death. She embodied the best of humanity, people who bring peace to others, make sacrifices for the greater good, and encourage happiness wherever they go. Liz's actions were a reflection of the belief that a brighter future for all begins with kindness, authenticity, and a commitment to helping others. In her absence, the community and those who knew her continued to search for justice, hoping to bring closure to a life lost too soon. Elizabeth Barraza was truly a remarkable person, whose influence and kindness left a lasting impact on everyone she encountered. A child of the 1990s and a native of Southeast Texas, Liz was deeply immersed in the worlds of fantasy, storytelling, and pop culture from a young age. Her love for science fiction was fostered by her father, Robert Jr., and she developed a particular affection for Star Wars. Liz grew up watching the films, and as she got older, she dove into the expansive Star Wars universe through television series, comic books, and novels. When new releases weren't available, Liz would turn to her other favorite escapist worlds, especially Harry Potter. A self-proclaimed Potterhead, Liz became an expert in all things wizardry and magic, eagerly awaiting each new book release. Her passion for these imaginative realms didn't stop at enjoying them. Liz also became skilled in arts and crafts, particularly in costume making. She had an incredible talent for creating intricate, detailed outfits inspired by her favorite characters. As she grew older, Liz realized that she wasn't alone in this passion. There was an entire community of like-minded costume enthusiasts, known as cosplayers, who came together to celebrate their love for pop culture at conventions across the country. For Liz, these conventions were a place to connect with others who shared her enthusiasm and creativity, and she proudly showcased her amazing creations. Liz's passion for cosplay and Star Wars led her to a deep connection with Sergio Barraza, a fellow Texas native who shared her love for the escapist hobby. The couple, united by their shared interests, married in the winter of 2014, blending their enthusiasm for Star Wars and cosplaying. Together, they traveled to comic conventions across Texas and the broader United States, showcasing Liz's expert crafting skills and passion for bringing characters to life. Outside of conventions, Liz and Sergio were active members of the 501st Legion, a renowned organization of Star Wars fans who create and wear screen-accurate replicas of the franchise's most iconic villains. The 501st Legion isn't just about costumes. It's a community of over 14,000 volunteers who use their creations to support charitable causes. Members visit hospitals, attend fundraising events, and raise awareness for medical research and other important causes. For Liz, these charitable endeavors were at the heart of her life's mission. She didn't hesitate to donate her time and energy to brighten the lives of those who needed it most, particularly sick children and adults, showing a level of selflessness and compassion that defined her character. Liz and Sergio Barraza had always been a devoted couple, bound by shared passions and an unwavering work ethic. Their bond only grew stronger over the 5 years they spent together, marked by both personal and professional accomplishments. Liz's selfless nature, exemplified by her dedication to the 501st Legion and charitable work, complemented Sergio's own commitment to their shared passions. In celebration of their upcoming 5th anniversary, Liz planned a magical trip to Orlando, Florida, with a visit to the newly opened Harry Potter attractions at Universal Studios. The excitement of the trip was heightened by Liz's anticipation of wearing the homemade costumes she had crafted for the occasion. To make the vacation more financially feasible, Liz and Sergio decided to hold a garage sale, selling old items from around their house. What began as a simple, innocent effort to ease their finances soon spiraled into a tragic event. As they prepared for their anniversary celebration, the couple's routine was shattered by the shocking and unsolved murder of Liz Barraza. The timeline of events leading to Liz's untimely death begins just after New Year's Day 2019, as Liz and Sergio were filled with hope and excitement for the future, blissfully unaware that tragedy was on the horizon. The couple plans the perfect celebration, choosing the new Harry Potter attractions at Universal Studios Florida as their dream destination. They set their departure for the end of the month and begin making arrangements. As January goes on, Liz and Sergio realize that their anniversary trip will stretch their budget to the limit. Liz also wants to buy Sergio a few gifts, so the couple decides to hold a garage sale just before their departure, selling items they no longer need to raise some extra spending money for the trip. As the month draws to a close, they finalize the details of the sale. They plan it just days before their Florida trip and inform close friends, family, and coworkers, keeping the news private from social media and the wider town. The last week of January arrives, and Liz requests time off work for both the trip and the sale. Working as a data reporter for a pipeline inspection company, Liz manages to get the time off approved. On the night of January 24th, Liz and Sergio make their final preparations. Sergio prepares to go to work as usual, while Liz tells him she'll wake up early with him to start putting up signs for their garage sale before sunrise. The couple falls asleep, eager for the day ahead, unaware of the danger that awaits. As the rooster crows on Friday, January 25th, 2019, the morning is just breaking. Sergio gets ready for work while Liz gathers the supplies for the signs. She steps outside with him as he climbs into his truck. At the same time, security and CCTV cameras capture a 2013 or newer dark-colored Nissan Frontier Pro 4X driving through the Brazos Tomball suburb, a vehicle unfamiliar to the neighbors and never seen in the area at such an early hour. At around 6:48 a.m., Sergio kisses Liz goodbye and drives off in his truck, with CCTV footage showing him leaving the housing complex on his way to work. Over the next 4 minutes, Liz begins setting up the signs alone in her front yard, unaware of any visitor or unusual event. At around 6:52 a.m., the same Nissan Frontier is spotted again on a neighbor's doorbell camera, now facing Liz's front yard where she continues working outside. The dark-colored truck passes the house and parks in another home's driveway. From the driver's seat, a person with either long hair or a wig exits the vehicle and walks towards the spots where Liz places a sign. The pursuant, wearing what could either be a trench coat or a long robe, conceals something as they walk up to Liz. Liz looks up startled, but doesn't run away. Only 8 seconds pass of what appears to be a quiet conversation before the figure in the long garments pulls out a gun and shoots Liz 3 times at point-blank range. The killer then steps over Liz's body, seemingly checking for something before firing off one final point-blank shot. As the clock ticks forward to 6:53 a.m., the shooter sprints from Liz's body back to their truck. They hop inside, back out of the driveway, and drive up and down the street once more, almost as if observing the crime scene before peeling out from the neighborhood, away from the cameras and forever into anonymity. At the same time, a male subject who heard the gunfire and saw the truck escape runs outside and calls 911 to report both the shooting and ask for an emergency medical response. Meanwhile, another neighbor who comes outside in response to the commotion quickly understands what has happened and personally calls Sergio to inform him Liz has been shot. Not even 10 minutes go by, and Sergio returns to the neighborhood to tend to his critically injured wife. Medical and emergency response personnel join him, and Liz is rushed to the hospital. Meanwhile, police begin interviewing neighbors to try and find out exactly what transpired. Liz makes it to the hospital still breathing with a heartbeat. However, after surviving through the night, the following day on Saturday, January 26th, she succumbs to the gunshot wounds and passes away. Soon after, on the investigation side of the ordeal, authorities are quick to label the death a murder, as the crime scene suggests an execution-like shooting combined with the eyewitness testimony of the male subject who saw the killer flee. Within a matter of weeks, police canvassed the Tomball suburbs for any and all security footage that may give them a better glimpse of what happened on January 25th at 6:52 a.m. One of the Barraza's neighbors then gives law enforcement a copy of their doorbell cam tape from that morning, the now infamous recording of Liz's final moments. In the coming days, detectives study the security footage and release it to media outlets, hoping someone will come forward to identify either the truck or the shooter. Tips pour in, but nothing substantial rises to the forefront of the case, a case growing colder by the minute. It wouldn't be for another year until the Barraza family finally receives a major update in the investigation. During a one-year memorial held by family members, community members, and members of the 501st Legion in honor of Liz's life at the tail end of January 2020, reporters hear from a lead detective on the case that police have obtained a warrant that could lead them directly to the party responsible. There are no other details given, and the exact type of warrant is not revealed, whether it be an arrest warrant or an evidentiary warrant. Again, however, the leads stop there without any major announcement until June 30th, 2020. A breaking news bulletin reveals that police unveiled an additional nugget of information stemming from the CCTV footage capturing Liz's murder. Authorities announce after analyzing discernible audio from the recording, it can be said confidently that as the suspect approached Liz at 6:52 a.m., Liz could be heard saying good morning in response. It is not a major clue, but it does make detectives wonder if Liz didn't actually know the suspect as opposed to earlier theories. Sadly, that news alert on June 30th is the last piece of evidence the public has received in Liz Barraza's case. As of today, Liz's brutal murder remains unsolved. The investigation did undergo a change in top leadership, so that must be considered as to why there are apparently no sizable leads despite almost 2 years of sleuthing, as well as the global pandemic slowing down the world in general beginning in March of 2020. All that being said, police maintain that this case is still very much solvable and will continue to pursue any and all leads provided by the public or otherwise. Without a doubt, the biggest and really the only case point in the Barraza investigation is the CCTV security footage procured from around the crime scene by police in the direct aftermath of January 25th's senseless murder. The video shows the murder take place, albeit from a distant and grainy point of view. However, it also shows the suspect flee, and most importantly, the side profile of the Nissan Frontier Pro 4X driven by the shooter. Before I play the video in its entirety as first released by authorities, I want to be upfront about the disturbing nature of the footage. A figure with long hair, a long coat or robe, and what could be boots parks across the street from the Barraza residence, walks over to the front yard where Liz works on the garage sale sign, confronts her yard where Liz works on the garage sale sign, confronts her with 8 seconds of unknown dialogue, then shoots her 4 times at point-blank range before standing over her body and running off. The most contested part of the video is whether or not the shooter is a woman, as it might seem at first glance, or a man dressed to appear as a woman. It truly is hard to tell. Some point to the end of the video where the killer runs away, stating that the gait is most often attributed to the form of a female run. However, it is also widely believed that the killer was wearing boots as a part of their peculiar getup, and that may have changed the appearance of their movement. Nevertheless, we don't share this video to determine whether or not the killer was male, or female, or disguised, or in plain clothes. It's meant to spread awareness, and hopefully catch the eye of someone who hasn't seen it before, recognizing something that could be game-changing, a vital clue. If anything in this video rings a bell, even the slightest memory in the back of your mind, whether it be the identity of the shooter or the origin of the Nissan Frontier truck, contact Crime Stoppers at 713-222-TIPS. Let us now turn to the most prominent theories that attempt to explain the unsolved murder of Liz Barraza. Because of how recent the Liz Barraza murder case is, the theories surrounding it are few and far between. Both its recency and a withholding of most case details by law enforcement are to blame for this, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Police usually keep important clues and even pieces of evidence that don't seem relevant close to their chest in order to avoid tipping off the real suspects of their findings or threatening their chances of making an arrest. It's why studying cold cases within their first few years of investigation are so tricky. There simply isn't enough yarn to thread together a solid board of theories, at least not yet. However, there are still some ideas. One of the very early hypotheses speculated by case followers was that either Sergio or Liz was involved in a secret love triangle, and the shooter from the video is an enraged lover or person who was intimately involved with one of the members of the couple. However, we don't believe this is the case. Personal and melodramatic gossip often circulates after a murder, and it can be harmful to the Barraza family and disrespectful to the memory of Liz herself if presented without any real evidence. In fact, there is a very simple and straightforward observation regarding this theory that helps delegitimize it from rampant belief. If there was indeed a love triangle and a secret partner involved, there would be a paper trail, or at least a digital one. There would be emails or texts or some sort of communication remaining on a phone or a computer, a forgotten voicemail or letter, or something left over to make a connection. The absence of any evidence of this nature speaks for itself. It also shouldn't have to be said, but Sergio himself has been very clear and concise with police, and has fully cooperated with both law enforcement and the media. He has shown no signs he has something to hide, and until police uncover something to the contrary, we must focus on other possibilities than those that likely end up in a tabloid magazine. Of course, the shooter could be connected via a close relationship to either Liz or her husband, but to immediately point fingers towards a scandalous extramarital affair would be jumping the gun. Another commonly held belief about who the killer could be is that they met Liz somewhere at a comic book convention or similar cosplaying event, and for whatever reason, fixated on her with the intent to murder. But why or how could this happen? One explanation is the passion behind fan-based activities such as comic cons and other global events is normally brought to the absolute extreme. It regrettably doesn't take long when investigating some pastimes such as these to find there is a history of toxic fandom, misogyny, and elitism, certainly not in the majority, but that 1% is known to exist. Of course, cosplaying and passionate fandoms are a good thing, full of good people with good intentions, and are meant for escapism and passion, but there are cases where people have taken their favorite pop culture iconography a little too far, and that bad blood has been known in the past to spill over into nefarious and criminal territory. Thus, it is suggested that somewhere along their travels or even in an online community, Liz met someone who became overly jealous of her or Sergio, made advances, and when they didn't get what they wanted, went after her in the most horrific way possible. Now, while this is also somewhat unlikely to not have a trail of communication somewhere on the internet for police to track, it's possible this connection was made in person, and the killer was an unknown stalker following Liz around, and waiting for her to be alone. There have been confirmed cases of women being stalked at comic conventions before, and has even led to abuse and assaults. It is not a common occurrence, but it has happened frequently enough for some to consider it in connection with Liz's case. The biggest criticism to the cosplay-related stalker theory is how out of place the subject was in Tomball itself. The neighbors never reported seeing the Nissan Frontier truck in the housing complex prior to that night, and it wasn't recorded on CCTV cameras in the hours or days leading up to the murder. For the stalker to have been following Liz prior to the shooting, they would have had to track her movements covertly using a different vehicle, ensuring she would be alone at the right time. Since the garage sale was not widely advertised, the stalker wouldn't have known to target the neighborhood that morning. The idea of randomly showing up seems highly improbable, making it appear more like a planned attack rather than a stroke of luck. Additionally, some believe the stalker was wearing a disguise in the security footage, possibly with a long robe and wig to conceal their identity. This could suggest an attempt to hide their true appearance, though this conflicts with the typical behavior of a stalker, who usually operates from the shadows without the need for a disguise. This raises the possibility that the shooter wasn't just a random stalker, but someone with a personal connection to Liz, someone who knew about the garage sale. However, this would assume that investigators hadn't already compiled a list of everyone who knew about the sale and ruled them out. If they did this, it would be incredibly difficult for someone to slip through the cracks, unless the person was a friend or coworker who rented or borrowed the car. In that case, if the police searched for the specific Nissan Frontier Pro 4X model through car rentals in the area, the individual could potentially avoid detection, as there would be no records linking them to the vehicle. And while it seems perhaps overly elaborate for a killer to rent a car for use in a murder plot, keep in mind that many think the shooter was also wearing a disguise, the longer hair appearing more like a wig than a natural hairstyle. Of course, this is impossible to discern on such a low-quality camera feed and can neither be confirmed nor denied. But if the killer dressed up, they may also have used the car under someone else's name, knowing there could be many prying eyes identifying the make and model of their getaway vehicle. Overall, however, the idea that the killer was a personal friend is hard to make sense of when considering the most recent update from law enforcement regarding the first words spoken by Liz when the shooter approached her. An unexcited good morning that was described by law enforcement as a greeting someone would extend to a stranger or passerby doesn't give much credence to the thought that Liz knew her killer. Again, this loops back to the disguise theory. Liz simply may not have recognized her killer at first glance. We also must remember that it was just 6:50 in the morning in the very early phases of daylight. The shadows of twilight may have cloaked the face of the perpetrator. We also don't know what exactly the killer and Liz spoke about in the 8 seconds between good morning and gunfire. Once the killer got close, Liz may very well have realized who it was. The CCTV footage doesn't reveal any sign of alarm or attempt to flee by Liz, but the gunman also drew their weapon quickly, allowing very little time to react. There are admittedly many holes with this theory, but it is also only one breakthrough or piece of evidence away from explaining everything. Sadly, for now, it is too vague to be counted on. The final theory most discussed by sleuths so far is that the shooter is a contract killer, someone who is hired by an associate, or even a stalker of Liz's to kill her that fateful morning. This would explain all the irregularities of the video and the situation at large as we currently see them. A contract killer who has no connection to the Barraza household wouldn't be identified by Liz herself. The vehicle would not be traced to any of her family and friends, and they would have been given the garage sale information by whoever hired them or asked them to do such a terrible thing. Obviously, this depends on the idea that it was someone who knew about the garage sale that sealed Liz's fate, but the way that the perpetrator's truck drove around the neighborhood that morning makes us believe that they knew Liz would eventually be alone that day, understanding Sergio would go to work while Liz set up the supplies. There's even a hypothesized conversation to go with this theory, with some thinking that the 8-second conversation before the muzzle flashes, consisting of the killer asking if Liz was who she really was, if her garage sale was really a garage sale, and then firing the gun when Liz confirmed this. It should be noted that if the killer was hired by contract, they were by no means a professional assassin or had much experience in violent crime. Someone who murders with intent per contract surely wouldn't have been so obvious, would have used silencing techniques for maximum stealth, and most certainly wouldn't have done it wearing a pair of boots and a long flowing robe. There are of course thousands of characters around the country that might fit that bill, but a hired gunman likely isn't one of them. Is this by design another way to camouflage intent with ridiculousness? It can't be ruled out, but at this point, everything is still in play. Before we divulge our hypothesis of Liz Barraza's unsolved murder, we want to make known that our conclusions are purely logical speculation based on evidence, circumstance, and factual subtext. We are only privy to the same information presented in each episode, and we do not attempt to promise certainty or an expert guarantee on the findings we reach in closing. We simply observe, research, and report. In the case of Liz Barraza, we believe that she was in fact murdered by an associate, whether it be a coworker or someone she met at either a cosplaying convention or other fandom-related events. Who this could be, whether it was a male or female, is impossible to specify. However, we are confident that whoever it was committed murder due to an unsolved confrontation with Liz. It was someone who was silent in their wrath, but instead of sorting out whatever differences they may have had turned into a cold-blooded murderer to try and solve their problems. Whether the long hair was a wig or the robe and boots are disguised can't be proven at the moment, but it can be assumed that in those 8 seconds after Liz cautiously greeted them with a good morning, the killer laid out what they were about to do before firing the gun 4 times at point-blank range. Whoever the killer was then ran off, got rid of their vehicle when its description hit the rounds of local news, and either seamlessly embedded themselves back into society like nothing ever happened or dropped off the map completely. We also believe that whoever it was did know about the impending garage sale and used that to their advantage. They probably canvassed the Tomball suburbs previously, and maybe even visited the Barraza residence prior to January 25th to decode Sergio's movements and know the window in which to strike. It's all additional support to the fact that this was premeditated murder, not a whimsical dark fantasy born from someone's nightmare. Nobody just woke up one morning and decided to drive to southeastern Texas and kill an innocent young woman. This was no serial killer. This was no escaped convict. This was someone who chose with every fiber in their body to commit an evil act. They picked the red paint for the walls. They were not forced or held at gunpoint themselves, and therefore they shall be pursued as such as the cold-blooded killer they are, deserving of all the justice that is awaiting to befall them. There are not a lot of details to pour out into the world, but there is always the chance for more to come in. If you have absolutely any connection to Liz or Sergio, or may know something not yet expressed in this episode or other case coverages, we implore you to let the proper authorities know, so that the offender out there who is still running around in the dark is thrust into the light. Let us return to the moments described at the start of this episode, reflecting on the brilliant and beautiful way Liz Barraza lived until her final breath. While it may seem cliché, Liz truly embodied a life of charity and goodness. She never wavered in her determination to improve the world around her, leaving a lasting impact on everyone she encountered and ensuring their lives were enriched as well. She approached challenges with grace, dedicating herself to helping those in need with boundless generosity. Her work in the 501st Legion was a testament to her creative empathy and passionate imagination, serving as a reminder that it doesn't matter how others perceive us. If something brings you immeasurable joy, something not found elsewhere, hold on to it with all your heart. Ultimately, doing what we love and surrounding ourselves with hope-filled things will create the same environment for others. Liz was the epitome of her community, and as a community ourselves, we owe it to her memory to preserve the goodness she shared. We will honor Liz Barraza and, in doing so, continue to fight for answers, determined to unravel the mystery of why she was taken from the world, so that the Tomball terror may finally be solved. Moving on to the next case. Eloise Worledge. Throughout the 1970s, Australia witnessed several monumental events. The Australian Labor Party came to power, the dismantling of the White Australia policy, which previously restricted non-Caucasian immigration, and the end of the long-standing economic boom that had contributed to the nation's prosperity. Amid these significant changes, a number of mysterious and disturbing crimes occurred, many of which remain unsolved to this day. Eloise and Worledge, the eldest of 3 children born to Lindsay and Patsy Worledge, was born on October 8, 1967. At the age of 8, she disappeared from her family home on Scott Street in Beaumaris, Victoria, on January 12, 1976. Her case remains one of the most perplexing in Australia's history. When police arrived at the Worledge home, they immediately sensed that something was off. Eloise's 4-year-old brother Blake had noticed his sister missing around 7:30 a.m. that morning. After a brief search of the property, Patsy and Lindsay contacted the authorities. There were no signs of a struggle inside the house or in Eloise's bedroom, but a small hole had been cut in the fly screen of her window, which was opened as far as it could go, leaving a gap of 38 centimeters. A piece of bark from the tree outside the window was also found on the floor of Eloise's room. Forensic analysis of the hole in the screen revealed it had been made from the inside. The hole appeared to be too small for an abductor to use, and investigators believed it would have been difficult for the perpetrator to leave the house via the window while taking Eloise with them. Authorities determined that the scene at the Worledge home appeared to have been staged, leading them to believe that Eloise and her abductor had likely exited through the unlocked front door rather than through the window. During further questioning, Blake, Eloise's 4-year-old brother, told authorities he had heard what he described as robbers taking his sister. He was too frightened to speak out at the time, fearing they would take him too. Blake also mentioned hearing crackling noises, which suggested to the police that the intruders had moved around Eloise's room, which had a seagrass floor. Police theorized that Eloise had been lured from her bed by someone she knew and trusted, given her shy and timid nature. Her parents described her as not likely to willingly go with strangers. However, authorities did not rule out the possibility that she was abducted by a prowler who was known to be in the area at the time. On the night Eloise disappeared, her father, Lindsay, had gone to bed about an hour and a half after her. He had been the last one awake, as her mother, Patsy, had gone to bed an hour earlier. The front door had been left unlocked because Lindsay was unaware that Patsy had forgotten to close it. Additionally, a hallway lamp was left on for the children to help them feel secure as they went to sleep. The last parent to go to bed always turned it off. However, on this occasion, Lindsay had forgotten to do so. But curiously, when Patsy awoke at around 4:45 a.m. to use the toilet, she noticed that the lights was off. This led investigators to theorize that by this time, Eloise was already gone. Although there was little physical evidence available inside the family home, authorities were relieved to find an abundance of witnesses around the neighborhood. One neighbor saw a dark green car speeding down Scott Street at 2 o'clock in the morning, while another reported seeing a green Holden station wagon, which she did not recognize, parked near the Worledge's house. Around this same time, neighbors heard a child scream and a car door slam. One man also reported that his tool shed had been broken into that same night. Then around midnight, another neighbor named and same saw a young man walking down the fence line of the family home. She noted that the unidentified man made her feel so uneasy that she crossed the road to avoid him. Around this same time, a woman named Molly Saltz, who lived a little further down the street, saw a young man jump the fence to the Worledge property after running in front of her car and across the street. Investigators also discovered that a young man had been canvassing the area over the previous few days, claiming that he was doing a survey on children's education. This man has never been identified, and it is unknown if he was the same man seen the night Eloise vanished. Without any further leads as to the identity of the man or men seen in the area around the time Eloise was last seen, authorities turned to Patsy and Lindsay with their suspicions. Both parents were having affairs and living separate lives at the time of their daughter's disappearance. They had been together for over 10 years but had recently become distant, and both parties sought to dissolve the marriage. The day that Eloise was taken, Lindsay was due to move out of the family home and into his own apartment. Authorities wondered if perhaps he'd done this to stall the moving date and allow him to spend more time in the family home. But ultimately, neither parent was ever linked conclusively to the disappearance. According to a senior constable who was speaking to a news outlet in 2002, Patsy told police at the time that she felt her husband was involved in the disappearance as a means of prolonging the inevitable and as a way of spicing her. However, Other investigators who worked the case believed Lindsay only really became a suspect because there was nobody else and no other leads. In 1976, the father of 3 had offered to take a polygraph test, but he was not taken up on this offer. He was later asked to take one in 2002, but the results were inconclusive. As we always say, it is worth bearing in mind that polygraph tests are never reliable and are rarely admissible as evidence in court. At the time the crime occurred, an extensive search was carried out involving over 250 people. The dog squad, search and rescue, and the mounted branch were just some of the police units involved in the 3-week-long search, but no trace of Eloise was ever discovered. Her body, if she has sadly passed away, has never been found either. A reward of $10,000, the modern-day equivalent of nearly $70,000, was offered too, but none of the leads ever brought in by this incentive ever propelled the investigation forward. Other suspects in 1976 included Patsy's sister and several of her friends, although it's unclear why. When the case was reopened in 2001, they were all dismissed as suspects. Their links to the case were entirely baseless. 1 month after Eloise vanished, a woman named Catherine Marling came forward and told the police that she'd seen a green 1966 model Holden in the street a week before the incident. Authorities believe that the vehicle was the same one which was stolen from Carlton in December of 1975, but the car was never found and the lead quickly died out. Over 100 family members and extended family members were looked into by police alongside over 250 colleagues, friends, students, and acquaintances too, but still the investigation stalled. In 2001, the police revisited the case and examined local sex offenders who were in the area at the time of Eloise's disappearance, including several teachers from her primary school. However, their efforts yielded no new leads, and the investigation stalled once again. Despite concluding that the scene had been staged and that more than one person was likely involved, authorities were unable to identify any suspects or gather evidence connecting someone to the crime. Following their divorce, both Patsy and Lindsay remarried, but neither remained hopeful that the case would ever be solved. Lindsay passed away in February of 2017, still unaware of what happened to his daughter. Patsy, on the other hand, focused much of her time on caring for her grandchildren. The couple's other daughter, Anna, had 3 children of her own. Tragedy struck the family again in 1997 when their only son, Blake, was killed after being struck by a car while crossing the road on a rainy night. The current status of Eloise's case remains uncertain. Given the lack of new leads or updates, it seems unlikely that the investigation is still active. Moving on to the next case. Rose Burkhart and Roger Atkinson. On September 12, 1980, 22-year-old single mother and trainee nurse Rose Burkhart, along with 32-year-old telephone installer Roger Atkinson, attempted to check into the Manor Holiday Inn near Williamsburg, Iowa. However, due to a convention taking place, the hotel had no vacancies and they were turned away. Later in the day, a cancellation allowed them to book a room. Everything seemed normal during their stay, and they did not draw attention to themselves. The following day, however, when housekeeping arrived at noon, something seemed off. The couple did not respond to knocks on the door or the maid's requests to be let in. Growing suspicious, the maid used the master key to enter and found the couple's feet on the bed. Initially thinking they were simply asleep, she looked further into the room, only to be confronted with a horrific crime scene. Both Rose and Roger were dead on the bed of their hotel room. They had sustained fatal head injuries, and Roger's fingers were severed from trying to defend himself from the attack. The huge blood loss and brain trauma endured by both parties were labeled as the cause of their death, with authorities determining that the wounds were made with either an axe or a hatchet. Rose was fully dressed, whilst Roger wore only shorts. The TV was still on in the room, and oddly, 2 chairs had been pulled up next to the bed, leading authorities to wonder if the couple had some kind of conversation with the killer. This, coupled with the fact that there was no sign of forced entry, brought about the speculation that the pair knew their murderer. Further evidence in the room showed that the killer had put his feet upon the desk and carved a bar of soap, using it to write this on a bathroom mirror. A strange clue that has brought no new leads to the case. Over 400 people were interviewed by authorities, including staff and guests at the inn. However, it seems more likely that someone closer to home was involved. A likely suspect in the case was Rose's ex-boyfriend, whom she had kicked out of her home for his drug use. She'd recently taken out a personal protection order against this unidentified man, and bought a dog for protection. One day when she returned home from work, though, she found her dog had been brutally slaughtered and hung up in her front yard. Investigators did look into Rose's ex-boyfriend, but found that his alibi checked out. He also seemed to pass a polygraph test, although this is known to not be foolproof as a method of proving someone's innocence. Another potential suspect in the double murder was Roger's uncle, Charles Ray Hatcher, a serial killer who had escaped from a mental facility in September 1980 but was later recaptured. Despite his history, he was never questioned regarding the murder of his nephew. In September 1980, agents from Missouri and Illinois were brought in to help investigate, and they looked into a similar murder that had occurred just 3 months earlier on June 25th, where a hatchet had been used. Tragically, Roger's father passed away in 2004, and his mother followed in 2012, never seeing justice for their son. One of Rose's closest friends, Tammy Berkman, has worked tirelessly to keep the case alive, even at the cost of her own marriage. As of 2020, the murders of Rose and Roger remain unsolved. Moving on to the next case. Philip Kahn. On July 24, 2000, remains belonging to an unidentified male were discovered 27 miles off the coast of Maine, near Grand Monon Banks. Fingerprints and DNA samples were collected from the remains. The fingerprints were submitted to the FBI, but no matches were found. The DNA was uploaded to the FBI's Combined DNA Index, yet there were no results. With no leads, the case went cold for several years. In 2019, the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner reached out to Parabon Nano Labs to conduct forensic genealogy on the DNA. Parabon analyzed the sample and determined that the man was Jewish, but his identity remained unknown. However, in March 2022, the FBI's Criminal Justice Information Services and Deceased Persons Identification Services Division became involved. The unidentified person's fingerprints were submitted for comparison in May 2022. On January 11, 2023, it was announced that the remains belonged to 84-year-old Philip Kahn. The FBI was able to match the fingerprints and dental records to Philip, who had been reported missing in Las Vegas in 2000. His next of kin has been notified of the identification. It was determined that Philip left Las Vegas and arrived in New York City in July 2000. The circumstances of how or why he ended up off the coast of Maine remain unclear. Moving on to the next case. Savannah Hoskins. Savannah Hoskins, a 34-year-old woman from Augut, Utah, was a mother of 5 and married to Joe Hoskins, a man with a violent temper. Their marriage was troubled, marked by frequent arguments, and Savannah had attempted to leave him on several occasions. On July 3, 1985, she was reported missing to the Augut Police Department. A few days later, residents discovered 2 legs floating in a nearby river. Initially appearing to be white, investigators later determined they belonged to an African American woman. Although it was suspected the legs belonged to Savannah, the limitations of DNA technology in 1985 made it impossible to confirm. No other body parts were found, and because they could not definitively identify the legs, Savannah's husband, Joe, could not be charged. Over the years, the case remained unsolved, and Joe Hoskins passed away without ever being questioned. In 2020, Savannah's children and grandchildren urged the police to reopen the investigation. The police still had a toenail from the discovered legs, which was sent for DNA testing. It was then confirmed that the legs belonged to Savannah. The Augut Police Department now believes Joe is responsible for her death. In a statement, it was made public that Joe actually made incriminating statements. And with other witness statements, plus the DNA match, all leads point to Joe Hoskins. We are confident based on all that evidence that if Joe were alive today, we would be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Joe Hoskins took the life of his wife, Savannah Hoskins. The son of Joe and Savannah, Joe Hoskins Jr., who now lives in Idaho, remains skeptical about the findings of the police. "No, I don't believe it," is all he had to say. There's currently a $3,000 reward for any information that could lead investigators to the rest of her remains. They are searching the area again now that they have better technology, but so far they have found nothing. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.